Hello, everybody. Please remember that we have a quiz this week, so please get it done. Quiz number 5. Also remember that we're still meeting for class, and I'm still talking. So remember that all this stuff that's not obviously can't be on quiz number 5 because I'm talking about it after the quiz is out will show up on the final. So all this stuff on Buddhism. So make sure that you are taking notes and still paying attention because it will show up on the final. I guess that's it. All I got to say. All right. Move on to Buddhism. It must be the monk in one of his past lives or something. He's come back to harass him, you know. Cats. Kind of God would create such a creature? Hello, Ms. Lane. All right, where were we? Stop here. You did it. All right. God bless you. Before I forget, there's a word I didn't put on the PowerPoint, but I wanted to give you anyways. It was talking about craving and the knowledge of suffering, our desire, right? Okay. Dukkha is the experience of suffering or unease. Yes, it's unease. Because we have cravings for permanence. Okay. But that word, and I forgot to give it to you, the word that is usually used for craving is tanha in Buddhism. When they speak about tanha, it means craving or our desire for things that we place our desires on things that are impermanent, that can't give us the absolute, satisfaction that we want. And so we're always unhappy about that. So we need to know that, have knowledge of that. And then following the Eightfold Path is how to remove, it leads us or helps us or are the tools that allow us to remove desire. Okay. Even for, so it liberates us and allows us, again, you see the idea of liberation, just like from Hinduism, freedom, being liberated and entering into nirvana. Okay. Now, one of the major ways that the Buddha parted, or in a major area that the Buddha parted ways with Hinduism, of course, I told you he didn't accept the Vedas, so that all right there kind of made his new group not Hindu or outside of Orthodox Hinduism. But another way in which he was outside of Orthodox Hinduism was on the question of Atman. Remember, all the way back near the beginning of the course when we talked about Hinduism, the Atman, sometimes translated in the West as soul, but it's not really the same kind of thing. It's your permanent identity, your permanent self, which goes through, travels through the various cycles of death and rebirth. Okay, through your multiple existences, whatever they might be, human, animal, I guess it could be mineral as well, spend a few billion years as a rock, If you're a really good rock, then you come back as, I don't know, a cockroach or something, go up the existential ladder, the ladder of being. But the Buddha rejected this. He rejected the idea of an Atman. Remember, for Hinduism, the Atman is permanent, okay? And that's what attaches to karma, or the karma is attached to your Atman. That it's the karma that the Atman is carrying with it that determines how it's going to come back in a future life, or that keeps it in the cycle of cycle of death and rebirth to begin with. Okay, remember you wanted to get rid of karma, good and bad karma. You wanted to be without the burden of karma in Hinduism, so that would allow you to finally break free of the cycle, samsara. Remember? I'm just reminding you what we learned about Hinduism. So that's what Hindu practices are meant to do. Yoga, devotion to the gods, Okay? Certainly you want to build up good karma for maybe a good future life, but ultimately you want to be indifferent to the forms of karma so that you have no karma burdening you, all right, good or bad. Well, Buddha kind of cut through all of this by saying, well, he followed through on the logic of what he realized, which is if the whole world, everything in the cosmos, everything in reality is constantly changing, is impermanent, it's coming into existence and out of existence, why does that not also apply to the Atman? Why should the Atman be given permanence out of all these things? And so he didn't. He preached on Atman, no self. Atman, self, the permanent self. But the Buddha taught that the existence even of the Atman was an illusion. Now, for Hinduism, the existence of the world is an illusion. I heard one person describe it as a Hindu person, describe it as like, I'm in your dream and you're dreaming me. It's kind of like how to explain Maya, the Hindu idea of the illusory universe. Okay. I don't think that means that Hindus don't believe the world is really real, but it's so changeable, it's not permanent. Hinduism recognized the impermanence of the world. And so, the questions of truth and kind of relativizes the idea of truth. Can you know eternal truth or objective truth and stuff like that? Yeah, but Buddha just kind of follows through the Hindu logic and says, but why do you stop at the Atman, the self? Because the self goes through cycles, doesn't it? It goes through death and rebirth. So it changes. Some versions of the Atman and some existences, you have a lot of bad karma, you have good karma, but the karma is different. So he denied the existence of the Atman. Even the Atman, that even this belief in a permanent, unchanging individual self, an Atman, was an illusion. Right? And again, it was this desire for permanence that we conceive that there is an ego. There is really an I up here that's perceiving the world and making some sense out of the world. Okay. And last time when I was talking about the Eightfold Noble Path and I talked about right concentration, right? Mindfulness. Okay, kids, get on your mats, clear your minds, although I don't know if they were doing that when you were little kids, but maybe they've done that to some of your brothers and sisters. Clear your minds, have a little time of mindfulness. And and these people who don't know Buddhism for spit probably, think it's just mindfulness. It simply means emptying your mind and kind of calming down your mind and relaxing in a way. And that's not what mindfulness is. It's to you are thinking about different things, and there are all sorts of meditational techniques, things that you think about as a Buddhist monk and stuff like that. And as you progress through these different techniques, and there are many of them, what you're ultimately, to just cut to the chase, what they're all designed to teach you is that when you clear your mind, yes, you really are clearing your mind because there is no mind there to begin with. There is no perceiver actually perceiving all those thoughts that you're putting away, in a manner of speaking. You're getting rid of, you're letting kind of dissolve and float away. There's nothing. It's empty. That's a big idea for some forms of Buddhism. Emptiness, reality, even the Atman is empty of existence. But I want to believe that there's an I and that there's a you. I want to believe it, just like I want to believe that there's some permanence in the world. But for the Buddha, there isn't in either. So this is all a fantasy. Nothing is unchangeable. All things come into existence, and then they go out of existence. And nothing in the universe lies outside of this process, including the Atman, the self. So there's no underlying reality. So what is the human being? What's he didn't deny samsara. Buddha believed in the cycle of death and rebirth that he had received from Hinduism. So he didn't deny that. So the next question was, well, okay, this begs the question, Buddha, what's coming back in all the cycles of death and rebirth? Something keeps recurring. Something seems to be permanent, because you can't say it's the same you from previous lives if there's no you to go through those previous lives. For example, the Buddha believed he had previous existences and lives. Well, how do you know it was you, Buddha, if your Atman is really just an illusion? You don't know it's you. Ah, karma. That's it. The Buddha rests his hat, if he wore a hat, which he didn't apparently. At least they don't depict him wearing a hat in any of the statues. He puts his hat on karma. Okay? You think there's an identity, a you, an I, but there isn't. What you see, okay. Getting the rest of my notes, seeing if I have this repetitive. Looking for karma. Well, anyways, I'll get to karma later, in a moment. It's karma that is what you're seeing. The effects of the actions that this Atman has done in a certain life, those persist and kind of like reconstitute themselves in the next existence. But the Atman doesn't. Did I give that as well? Okay, yeah, depending on this idea. I should have told you this before. I apologize. But what I've been talking about, this idea that all things come into existence and go out of existence, that all reality is kind of contingent in a way and impermanent and changing all the time, so that there's really no permanence to it. In a sense, you could say there's nothing there, okay, because it's constantly changing, is called dependent arising. Dependent arising. This is how it's described in Buddhist literature and in religious studies. Dependent, this is how you understand. All things arise, but they depend on their arising from something else. And that something else depends on something else. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And also they use this word anitya to describe the impermanence, which simply means not permanent. That's simple. Like anatman, no self. Anitya, not stable. The universe is not permanent or stable. It's anitya. It's the basic, I guess you could say, nature of the universe and everything within it. All right, I'll move on from that. Let's get to samsara and karma. I should have put that on another PowerPoint. What do we do after this? That's where let's get to that in a second. Let's just read this from one of the Buddhist writings. What's it from? The Milinda Panha. Oh, book 3, Milinda Panha, which is a dialogue between this person called Milinda. Milinda, you can see his name there. That he has, he's a foreigner actually, and he's having a dialogue, I guess, with a Buddhist monk about Buddhist teaching. And eventually he becomes a Buddhist himself. He's convinced of Buddhist teaching. Who would like to read this? This, I think, applies to what I've been talking about karma, etc., and so forth. Who would like to read this passage from the Milinda Panha, the dialogue of Milinda? King Milan. Okay, Mr. Belfield. Can't spell with the fingers from this one. Okay.
The king said, "Why is it, Nagasena, that all men are not alike, but some are short-lived and some are long-lived, some sickly and some healthy, some ugly and some beautiful, some without influence and some of great power, some poor and some wealthy, some low-born and some high-born, some stupid and some wise?" The elder replied, "Why is it that all vegetables are not alike, but some sour and some salt, and some pungent, and some acid, and some astringent, and some sweet? I fancy, sir, it is because they come from different kinds of seeds. And just so, great king, are the differences you have mentioned among men to be explained. For it has been said by the Blessed One, beings have each their own karma, are inheritors of karma, belong to the tribe of their karma, are relatives by karma, have each their karma as their protecting overlord. It is karma that divides them up into low and high and the like divisions. Very good.
Nagasena. Yeah, I think that's the monk. Anyways, okay, so the punchline here is, well, he's asking the monk or the Buddhist, why are people different? And the simple answer, if you could get to it easily, but they can't. It's just I think it's an Eastern way of talking about things. You constantly repeat stuff. But anyways, is karma. Okay, karma is the overlord. Karma is the thing that divides us into whatever our class is. So karma is kind of the ultimate. But also, I guess if I were thinking about it, I mean, karma is changeable as well. Some karma can be good, some can be bad, depending on circumstances. So could you even question the existence of karma, or is karma really an illusion? What's good or bad happening is not really happening, or it's not real itself. Don't know. But he seems to take it as a reality. This is an interesting dialogue because this name Melinda here, seems to be a corruption of Menander, which is a Greek name. So it seems that there's a dialogue between a Greek person from Greece, or at least the West, and this Buddhist monk. And we see kind of these contacts between northern India and places in Eastern Europe, especially Greece. And the Greeks made it over to northern India. Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedon, was one of the great generals of the ancient world, conquered northern parts of northern Greece and Afghanistan. And they were pagans when they encountered Buddhism. And you see even statuary of the Buddha that's done in the Greek style in Afghanistan and India, which you might think is out of place, but it's not, because there was that mixing of cultures, okay? And some of the ideas or the stories, there were encounters between the Greeks and between Buddhist thinkers, and Hinduism, of course, as well, which is kind of interesting, but it's not our purpose for this course. So Melinda was a European. He was not an Asian in this dialogue. And as I say, he's convinced by the arguments of the elder, and he becomes a Buddhist. So Buddha did believe in two major Hindu ideas, which are samsara and karma. He did believe in the continuation of a person's existence, at least via karma, and the Dhammapada, the way of the Dharma in English, but Dhammapada, which is kind of a summary of Buddhist teachings. There's this quotation, I'll read it. I have gone round in vain the cycles of many lives, ever striving to find the builder of the house of life and death, right? So I've been looking for who is the author of the samsara. I haven't found it. Well, I have found it, actually. I've seen the house builder. And who is it? Nevermore shalt thou build this house. Okay, who's the house builder? Well, I guess you could say karma is the house builder, if that's what's going through the various cycles. What continues karma? Tanha, desire. So if I get rid of all desire, evaporate my desires, then I can get rid of karma. And if there's no karma, there's nothing to build the house anymore. So I've seen the house builder, and now I know the house will not be built anymore, because now he's been awakened, right? He's the Buddha. He's been awakened. He's realized what's going on here. So there's nothing to come back. So the rafters of sins are broken. The ridgepole of ignorance is destroyed. The fever of craving, tanha, is past. For my mortal mind is gone to the joy of the immortal nirvana. Right? So I'm in nirvana now, even though I still seem like I'm here. Not me, but the Buddha. And yes, the Buddha will die. But he was already in nirvana. He was already awakened. So there's nothing there's nothing to come back at all in the cycle of death and rebirth. Nirvana. What is What is nirvana? Yeah, I'll get it. I already said that. What is nirvana? It is not heaven, although they do kind of they no, they don't. I'm sorry. I thought sometimes it's translated as heaven, but it's not heaven. Just like Westerners will translate Atman as soul. But nirvana is not really heaven. Okay, the meaning is extinction or cooling, like a flame that's put out, the cooling of fire or flame, something that's hot. And all nirvana is the end of your attachment to impermanent, permanent reality. So nirvana is not really a place that you go to. In some forms of Buddhism, it does develop into that idea of kind of like a happy place you go to, like Pure Land Buddhism. But, in traditional Buddhism from the Buddha, it's simply the state of nothingness because there's no attachment to impermanent reality anymore. And that's nirvana. It's a place of being and not being at the same time. All right. Because you realize that there's really nothing that's been going through the cycles of death and rebirth to begin with. And there's nothing that's going to continue once all your desires have been put away. So it's a wafting away, and is another translation of nirvana, the word nirvana. A wafting away, like smoke wafts away from a candle that's been snuffed out. I have snuffed out my cravings. I've snuffed out the candle, and now nirvana. I waft away, and then the smoke is there, and then it's gone. In Pali, it's called nibbana, just so you know. Sanskrit is nirvana, Pali nibbana. So to reach this state, is a better way of describing it, is the goal of Buddhist practice. You want to reach the state which is beyond all conditioning, all causation, beyond karma, beyond all mental description or conception. And nirvana cannot be described, although you do find a lot of descriptions of nirvana in Buddhist literature, but really it can only be experienced. But it is not a heaven or a place that you go to because there's no Atman to go anywhere. So it's a complete ceasing or ending of your entanglement by karma. There's no God you're united to. Okay? That's not part of it either. And even the gods are changeable and are part of this whole thing. And you have stories in Buddhist literature told of gods appearing and coming and falling at the feet of the Buddha and almost like worshiping Buddha because they recognize his wisdom. He teaches them. He teaches the gods about his ideas. He teaches them the Four Noble Truths and how to achieve nirvana. The gods. Something floating around here, sorry. Only the Buddha, the awakened one, can. Now, here's kind of like a little kick in the teeth. There can only be one Buddha in any age or cycle. So you might be like, well, wait a second. Are we talking about the Buddha? Didn't Gautama, this Gautama Siddhartha, become the awakened one like back in maybe the 600s BC or 500s BC? Yes, he did. So what's my possibility of becoming a Buddha? At this stage, not very good. Because there can only be one Buddha at a time. And we've got our Buddha. He's shown us the way. So no one of us, no matter how hard we try, can equal the awakened one who's already been awakened during this cycle. All we can hope for is that, where are we here? All we can hope for is that the end of our life cycle then we will be awakened. If we approach, we can get close to it, and then at the end of our life cycle, we will also enter into the state of non-attachment or nirvana, like the Buddha did. But he did it when, in his life. We can't do that now because there can only be one Buddha by definition. At least for traditional Buddhism. We'll learn later about the Bodhisattva, which kind of throws a monkey wrench into things. Okay. The Panchasila, the 5 precepts. Panch means 5 in Sanskrit, Indo-European language, so it's related to, it doesn't look like 5 in English, or cinco in Spanish, but pente in Greek, panch, pente, okay? Anyways, and sila means a command or a precept that you follow. So these are the essential, kind of like the 10 Commandments for Judaism. You have the 5 precepts of Buddhism, which someone here's inscribed on this stone somewhere. Oh, Lumbini, Nepal. Sorry, there it is. In the birthplace, the town where Buddha was born, the Buddha. And what are they? First of all, I observe refraining from killing any living beings. Okay? So no killing is the first command or precept. Taking life of any living being. I observe refraining from taking what does the owner not give. You can see this was not probably by someone who either doesn't speak English as a first language or went through the Philadelphia school system. Take your pick. Should I say Jersey City? Is that right? Okay. Don't knock the American school system. All right. So don't take things that don't belong to you. Stealing! Just say stealing! But don't take things that don't belong to you, Mr. Vitale. Observe refraining from committing sexual misconduct. Okay, so we can pretty much imagine what those are. Sexual violence or other things, misconduct. You can include even sleeping around if you're not married or prostitution. Observe refraining from telling lies, so things that are not truthful. Refrain from taking any intoxicant or drug, so alcohol or drugs. Okay, these are the essential precepts for any Buddhist. These are the essential vows that you make when you enter into Buddhism. So don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't commit sexual sins or sexual offenses, and don't don't drink alcohol or take some drugs and stuff like that. Now I had it in my notes because I saw it. It might be on another page. Now, if you're going to become a full-fledged monk, which is really what you need to do. Oh, here we are. Which is really what you need to do in order to achieve, if you want to, as close as you can to Buddhahood in this cycle of existence. Then there are a whole bunch of other, rules that are added on to this, which I'm looking for. Which I have here, but I think it's at the end of my notes. I know I saw. Where are we? No, I'm not going to be able to find it, and then I'll have to search for it at home, and it will be there. But anyways, there are other rules that if you're going to go all the way, there are additional rules that are added onto this for monks. Not taking money, you're supposed to beg for your food and stuff like that. Certain things, other rules that things you're not allowed to do. Maybe I'll come across them when I come through this, and I'll mention them then. But these are the 5 basic precepts of any Buddhist that they're supposed to follow in their life. Now, sacred writings. Does Buddhism have sacred writings? Oh, yes, it does. Okay? Many sacred writings. when the Buddha was a preacher, not a writer. He went around northern India teaching people the Four Noble Truths and stuff like that. And his message was, as we see in many religions, was passed on by word of mouth, having been carefully memorized by his students. Okay? And it was only much later, maybe during the first century BC, so like 400 or 500 years after Buddha was gone, that these teachings, memorized teachings, were written down and Buddhist scriptures were composed on the island of Ceylon, which is modern day Sri Lanka. So if you want to see a map, see where it is, show you. I did become a monk in Thailand. I shave your head. Go over here to India. Okay, in this island at the southern tip of India called Sri Lanka. Sri means holy or sacred. Lanka is related to the word lingam that we learned with Hinduism. Does anyone remember what a lingam is? No, that's probably a good thing. You can imagine what's hanging off the subcontinent of India, the holy ling. Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, as it was called in the old days. This is where the Buddhist scriptures appear. And it is still a majority Buddhist nation. A lot of Buddhists in Sri Lanka. It's the only part of the Indian subcontinent where Buddhism actually survived. It actually died out in India, even though, Buddha was from that region. He was from Nepal, technically, according to the boundaries of today. But, he was an Indian, and yet Buddhism and Hinduism, it spread around India, and then it died out. For various reasons, persecutions from Hindus, but also from the later Muslims who showed up, and it moved out into other regions, especially, as you know, Thailand and Cambodia and places like that, where it flourished. Still remains in Sri Lanka, but there are actually very few Buddhists in India where it originated, which is weird. Oh, not, I guess not. Well, it's unusual. You wouldn't expect it. You expect it to have some influence. Well, it does have some influence because if you look at the flag of India, I mean, all the symbols of India, the Indian government, are Buddhist symbols. The lions, there are 3 lions, which are the symbol, like we have the bald eagle. For India, it's 3 lions. Those are the symbols of Ashoka's empire. Ashoka was a Buddhist emperor, not a Hindu emperor. And the wheel, the prayer wheel, is on the flag of India. So the prayer wheel isn't really used in Hinduism. Remember, it's turning the wheel of Dharma. It's a devotional practice of Buddhism. Yes, it's Callahan. We should have a jar up here. Every time someone goes out, I get a quarter. I'd be a rich man. I would. Anyways, so they started writing down the Buddha's teachings. And almost immediately after the Buddha's death, or his entrance into nirvana, we might say, Mizutenreiter, there were arguments within the community about the correct interpretation of his teaching. So you had a number of what are called the early Buddhist councils by his followers. The first one being Rajagriha, the next significant one is Vaishali, and the last one is Pataliputra. And these are all legendary. I mean, we don't know even if historically they actually happened. We're told that they happened, but how do you prove it? We don't have any records of these councils and stuff like that. So there's not a lot of historical evidence, but, I don't have any reason to disbelieve the Buddhist memory that we had these councils. So I'll just go with it. It's generally accepted amongst religious studies scholars. So when you talk about these dates are approximate, they are kind of like guesstimates when these councils were held. Rajagriha in the 5th century, 486 BC, sometime in the 5th. And then Vaishali, and yeah, these are different names that they're also called. Rajagriha is also called Rajgir, Vaishali, Vesali, sometime in the 300s. Okay, 386 to 376. And Pataliputra in the 3rd century BC, we think. It's also called Patna. Mm-hmm. And so, whether these councils existed or not, they are certainly important in Buddhist memory. And they're used as kind of like guideposts for explaining like later divisions that will emerge within Buddhism between different forms of Buddhism. Okay. But Rajagriha was held, according to the story, was held a few months after the Buddha passed into nirvana. And the monks met to establish his teachings as best they could remember him. And when you read Buddhist writings, a lot of them start with the statement, I remember what what they call him, the Blessed One or whatever. I remember what I heard from the Blessed One, and it was this. And they tell the story. So, they tell you outright, this is my memory of what I heard. And the monks at Rajagriha kind of came together and said, well, what did you hear? I heard this, I heard that. And they kind of bring the stuff together, iron out, I guess, any contradictions in the teachings. The next council of Vaishali was dealing with lax practices amongst the monks. They were amongst the monks. Whose voice? The poetry just flows with Winko. I can't control it. It emerges, Mr. Whitehawk. Anyways, there were some problems in the life of the community. The monks weren't, maybe some of the monks weren't living according to the rules that were set forth for the community, the Buddhist community. And then Pataliputra, which is in all caps because it's the most crucial of the 3 meetings. This was one supposedly called by Ashoka, the emperor. And the monks, the meeting lasted for about 9 months, with the monks checking and completing and classifying the traditions from the Buddha. Okay? And from these councils, we arrived at various sacred writings. In general, it's called the Tipitaka or the Tripitaka in Sanskrit, which means 3 baskets. T or tree means 3, and a pitaka is a basket. Why is it called that? Who knows exactly, but as the story goes, is that they kind of like threw the writings into different baskets based on their classification. So the 3 baskets, but it could just be a conceptual thing, a symbol, this is another word for group, the 3 groups, but the 3 baskets, the Vinaya basket, the basket of order, Vinaya, kind of like the rule of the community. Sutta, Pitaka, so discourses, sutras, okay, sutta, discourses, and the Abhidhamma, Dharma, teaching, and Abhi has a sense of, I guess, special or something like that. So the basket of special Dharma, special teachings. Okay, so those are the 3 sections, and within each of these, there are many, many, many different writings. They seem to be organized according to how long the discourses are. You have the book of great discourses, of shorter discourses, of middle discourses. So based on how long they are. So there are just tons of different writings inserted into each of these 3 baskets. Yeah, okay, that's in my notes anyways. Yeah, they kept them in baskets. It's written in Pali, as I told you, that's the main religious language, not Sanskrit. Pali is the main religious language of Buddhism. So if you're studying Buddhism as a scholar, then you have to learn Pali. You should also learn Sanskrit as well, because there are Sanskrit Buddhist writings. So the Tipitaka is also sometimes called the Pali Canon, the Pali group of writings, the Pali Canon. Okay? And Pali is a dead language. No one speaks it anymore. It's an ancient language. And it includes the Tipitaka forms the essential body of teaching for all Buddhists. The basket of order, as I said, is kind of like the rule, or it is the rule for the community, the community of monks and nuns, those who have fully committed themselves to following the Noble Eightfold Path and achieving as best they can nirvana. So the Vinaya includes the rules of governance for the Sangha, and there is some historical material about the life of the Buddha and stuff like that, but it's mostly focused on governance, and the rules. The Sutta, which is discourses or instructions, is a collection of, as you might expect, discourses, especially the teachings of the Buddha. So it's a huge collection of writings, over 500, almost 547 stories just about the previous lives of the Buddha. The Abhidhamma is more philosophical and speculative about what does the Buddha's teachings mean. Okay? So it's more speculative thing, reflecting on Buddhist thought. And then outside of the Pitakas, there are many, many more important texts. As I said, some written in Sanskrit, some in Chinese, other languages. Korean is a major source of Buddhist teaching for a lot of, or Buddhist knowledge for some of these texts, Korean translations. Like we read a section from the Milinda Panha, which is the questions of King Milinda, this discourse between Menander, some Greek dude, Milinda, talking to a Buddhist elder about Buddhism. So we have that, the Milinda Panha, but there's all sorts of other stuff. Each group can have its own separate group of writings, each separate group within Buddhism and the Sangha. Yeah, this is just a picture of part of the Tipitaka. This is how they wrote things, wrote books, how they write books in Asia. They're like strips of leaves or wood or something, or even metal. Then these long strips that then are attached to each other, and you flip them. It's like a flip book, you flip them up like this. So here, you have pictures here. This is the Buddha after he entered into nirvana. He's kind of shown he's on his side, sleeping with a smile. It's party nirvana. He's kind of in the state of nirvana already, even though he hasn't left yet. Okay, so they have a picture of that. And here's, one of the texts written here on the slip of whatever it is, wood or leaf. Yeah. So they constructed books a little bit differently in Asia, but that's how they did it. Yeah, so here are a couple examples from the scriptures. One is from the Vinaya, because it's dealing with these are both the Vinaya, aren't they? Because they're both dealing with rules of the community. I just thought these were interesting. Don't worry about it. I'm just giving you the information of where it comes from. Don't worry, I had to hunt around for this because there's so many scriptures. Who would like to read this first thing from the Pitaka? I believe the Vinaya Pitaka. Ms. Carney, come on down.
If any bhikkhu entered upon the training lively for bhikkhu, not having rejected the training, not having disclosed his incapability, should engage in the act of sexual intercourse, even with just a female animal, he is disqualified, not in communion.
Okay then. What's a bhikkhu, Ms. Carney? Or a bhikshu in Sanskrit, but this is Pali, so it's bhikkhu. What's a bhikkhu or a bhikshu? It's on the PowerPoint if you want to look. Or in your notes. It's another word. A bhikshu or a bhikshuni. Bhikshuni, if that helps your memory. A bhikkhuni. Is that Ms. Hedgepeth all the way back? Ms. Hedgepeth, are you back there? No, that's Ms. Lane. I'm sorry. Oh, my glasses on. Sorry, Ms. Lane. Bhikshuni is a woman. It's a bhikkhu. It's a man. Bhikshu. Yes, Ms. Oler?
A Buddhist ascetic?
Good. A Buddhist ascetic. Or we could say a monk or a nun. Okay, so if a monk, it's talking here about men, a male, it's the male form, so it's men. So if a monk who's, been admitted into the community, gets a little bit amorous, because he's not supposed to be having any sex at all, really, supposed to be continent, meaning no sexual activity. But if he has sex at all, even with just an animal, a female animal, kind of a weird qualification, don't you think, Miss Coyle? Couldn't you just say, well, if he has sex and he violates his promise of continence of not having having to do sexual acts, why are you bringing up animals and female animals? What's going on in this person's mind? Anyways, even if it's with, just a female animal, he is disqualified. He's kicked out of the community, or he has some penance to do. Maybe he's not, disqualified, I would assume means kicked out of the community, but maybe there's a penance. Like here, this is a penance, an expiation. Who would like to read this one? What's this one? Who would like to read this? Let's see here. Didn't you read already? Yeah. Not today? Okay, go ahead.
Now, if an unrelated male householder or female householder should have a robe cloth woven for a bhikkhu by cloth weavers, and then if that bhikkhu uninvited beforehand, having approached the cloth weavers, should make a suggestion about the robe cloth, saying, "Friends, this robe cloth which is being woven for me, make it long, wide, thick, well woven, well diffused, well scraped, and well plucked. Certainly we will also then present a little something to the sirs. And if that bhikkhu, having said so, should present a little something, even just a little alms to, this is a case involving expiation with which
Expiation means basically to give away or to make up for. You're making up for something. You're expiating and forfeiting. I'm assuming the expiation or what he's making up for, the forfeiture is the robe. So it's basically, a monk who's a little bit maybe too, hinting a little bit too much about stuff that he wants. And householders are members of the community. They're not monks like he is, but they're probably Buddhists who have taken the 5 vows or the 5 precepts, okay? And they're householders like in Hindu society. This guy has a job and he's running a home with a family and supporting the community. And this monk is kind of like hinting that, they offer him or they want to make him a nice long robe. And he's kind of telling them how he wants it and stuff like that. So he's, maybe showing tanha, a little too much craving or desire, in this case for the good life, when he should be more an ascetic, right? He's older, that's what the word ascetic means, that it's spiritual exercises, you're denying yourself certain pleasures and stuff like that, just like with regular exercise. You're causing yourself pain in certain ways in order to grow or to build that spiritual muscle. Okay? So, if you do this for me, I'll give you a little something, stuff like that. He's asking for stuff without asking for it, which he shouldn't be doing. So he needs to be punished. So take away the robe. So just an example of what's going on, and at least in the rule part of the scriptures. I thought this was interesting. Okay. Let's talk about the community. The community, the Sangha. Okay. As I told you at the beginning, doesn't sound right to me. Let me go back to the beginning. I'm curious. Oh, it's 400. No, it is 495. I got that right. So as I told you in the beginning, whoops. Ah, yes, I did revise this. I worked on this a little bit. Sorry about that. Oh, no, because I'm talking about the Sangha now. That was the scriptures. Okay, good. Just prattling to myself. Don't listen. 495, almost 500 million Buddhists in the world, at least as of 15 years ago, according to the book I consulted. It's about as good as I could figure out, even on the internet. I would imagine it's more now. It's probably over 500 million. It is difficult to get completely accurate numbers because, of the religious conditions in places like China or Tibet, which basically China controls Tibet. But okay, around 500 million Buddhists. And there are roughly two main forms of Buddhism, the Theravada and the Mahayana. Theravada means teaching of the fathers, teachings of the elders, actually not the fathers, of the elders, and Mahayana means the great vehicle, the great vehicle. And you can see a map there in color of where most, in which areas of the world either group predominates. And it's like 60-40. Theravada is 40% of Buddhists and Mahayana is 60%. Okay? So Theravada in the red here, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma. This is Burma, actually. Sorry. This is Thailand. Laos, Cambodia. So Theravada Buddhists make up 40%, and the great bulk, I should say the great bulk, but the bulk of Buddhists, certainly the majority, 60% are this Mahayana form, which you find, China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Nepal, Tibet, all this. I think Mahayana is the most popular. Well, I shouldn't say that in the Western world. I shouldn't say that. I do wonder which one is more popular, Theravada or Mahayana amongst Westerners. Anyways. So these are, I'll get to that in a second. These terms, the early terms for these two groups are the Theravada and the Mahasanghika. Okay? This word Theravada comes from Saviravada, which means an elder. And Mahayana derives from the Mahasanghika, the great community, the greater community, larger group of Buddhists, I guess. Okay. And these two early groups or schools split apart, maybe at the Council of Pataliputra that I mentioned before, but we don't know exactly why. Okay, but something happened that caused this rupture between these two forms, or at least these, maybe rupture is too strong a word. They diverged. Okay, and so we have to go back to the Buddhist councils. I said we would come back to them. Yes, talked about them for the scriptures, but also we need to talk about the councils for this divergence that happens. Almost immediately after Buddha's death, there were already, as I said, arguments or discussions about the correct interpretation of his teaching. Okay? There was even confusion. There's what scholars call the 18 schools of Buddhism. So there were already 18 different viewpoints on what the Buddha's teaching was. Now, the Buddha died like when he was 80, right? Or when he was 80. And he spent a long career teaching. I would think they would have maybe pinned down what he thought, right? Or what he meant. I mean, he wasn't speaking in riddles. We've read some of the Buddhist literature. We talked to Malunkyaputta. He wasn't speaking in riddles. He seemed pretty clear to me. Maybe a little long-winded, in my opinion. Sorry, Buddha, but he seemed pretty clear about what his teachings were. But when he died, boom, there was just all of a sudden you got like the 18 different views, 18 schools of Buddhism. Each arguing about which version was the more authentic. So we have we come back to our three councils, Rajagriha, Vaishali, and Pataliputra. And as I told you, among scholars, there is considerable uncertainty about when these councils occurred, what happened at them, all right? So we just basically have to rely on the traditional accounts and maybe pick through those details to maybe find the historical details. Not that the traditional accounts might be wrong, but they might have a point of view. So we have the Council of Rajagriha, which I told you was held a few months after the Buddha had died to establish his teachings. Okay, started to come up with the Tipitaka. At least we believe two of the baskets were put together at Rajagriha, the collection of his probably the collection of the Buddhist discourses, the Sutta, and the Vinaya, which would make sense. Which would make sense. Speculative stuff would seem logically to come later when people are thinking later about stuff. So you want the rules of order, the Vinaya, and the discourses of the Buddha. Those seem to be the two Pitakas that are put together. Vaishali, as I said, were lax practices amongst the bhikkhus or the bhikshus. For example, some of them were taking money, which they weren't supposed to do. They were supposed to avoid money and not touch money because they're beggars, basically. They go out begging for their food and stuff like that. They're given their clothing by the community. All they have is their robe. So they don't need money. They don't touch money. But some of them were accepting gold and silver. And so there was a disagreement about, some were saying that that was okay. One group said that it was okay. And there were also other practices that were okay. And then the other group said no. These were illegal. These were outside the boundaries of the rules of the community. And the council ended up siding with the more orthodox conservative group that said, no, these are violations of the rules. Okay, so the liberals kind of lost out at Vaishali. Those who did want to have money, which maybe was a good thing. And according to the story, this is when you start to see maybe a separation between the two groups, because the more liberal or laxer monks, the ones who did want to accept money and these other things, to do these other things, they didn't like the decision of Vaishali, so they went and held their own meeting, their own council, which they, of course, the council approved of what they wanted to do. And so some people see this as the generation or the emergence of the Mahasanghika, the Mahayana Buddhists, the laxer Buddhists, But we do know that by the time of the Council of Vaishali, there was a schism. There was a division of the Saviravadins, the elders, and a group called, the more progressive group called the Great Sangha, the Mahasanghika, which will become Mahayana Buddhism. And this schism, which seems to, maybe for this reason, questions about, adapting some of the rules, comes to a head at Pataliputra. Again, so Pataliputra is in all caps with an asterisk in bigger type. Okay, the schism is formalized. There's the great schism between the elders, the Staviras, and the great Sangha, the great assembly, or the Mahayanists. Now, there's the scholarly opinion about what happened, and there's a traditional opinion. I'll give you both opinions, okay? And you can sort out which one you want to accept. I would take the one that's more interesting, I guess. But let's see. Yeah. The sources, Buddhist sources, are pretty clear, it seems, that Pataliputra was the source of the schism, the divergence between these two groups. And according to scholars, it's because it was a divergence over rules. It wasn't about doctrine per se. Buddhist teaching was more just the rules they wanted to follow. Okay? And there was a conflict. There was a smaller group that who identified with the Staviras, the elders, who wanted to add more rules to the rules that the monks were already following. So they wanted to extend the Vinaya to include other things. But in this case, the Mahasanghika, or the Mahayana Buddhists, or what will become the Mahayana Buddhists, objected to that. They said, no, the rule that we were given from the Buddha, or that we've been following, this is the rule. So in this case, they're actually portrayed as more conservative. And it's the elders that are trying to be a little more progressive by, let's add all this extra stuff, maybe for new circumstances or whatever. But the Mahayanas are like, no, we stick to the original, all right? We keep to the original rules. They're sufficient. So it was a dispute over the rules contained in the Vinaya and over their discipline. I'm trying to summarize here. Yes, which okay, so the elders wanted to revise rules and add rules, which the Mahayanists or the members of the Mahasangika opposed. Okay, um, and they wanted to make certain rules that were customary, were simply customs. You could do these things into obligatory things to do. Now you had to do them. Okay? And again, the Mahayanists were like, no, the customs should remain customs. If people want to do them, then they do them. But they shouldn't be made obligatory because the Buddha didn't make them obligatory. If he didn't require them, we shouldn't require them. Okay, so it's an argument over rules. All right, I think I've beat that to death. So move on to the traditional view. That's the scholarly view. Okay. In this case, the Mahayanists were resisting innovation. Traditionally, for Buddhists, the split occurred over a question of doctrine, not rules. The question of an arhat, someone who has kind of reached close to enlightenment, or one might say awakenment, Ms. Crupton. The arhat, okay? An arhat, I've got a definition here. Oops, hold on a second. Yep. Here's the scholarly opinion. Rules, and more rules. And then the traditional view, which is, well, arhats, or Mahadeva's 5 theses. I just want to get to the definition of an arhat. There it is. Someone who has achieved enlightenment, but will achieve nirvana, enter nirvana upon physical death. Okay, so kind of like the Buddhist version of a saint, we might say, a Christian saint, holy person. They've gone as far as they can go, but they can't become a full Buddha because there's already been a Buddha. So, they're in another category. They will go to nirvana on their death, but they can't really enter it now as a Buddha because there's already been a Buddha. Okay? So, in the question of the arhat, this dude Mahadeva came up with 5 claims about, well, what happens when someone reaches arhathood, when someone becomes an arhat, finally kind of reaches enlightenment or as close to awakenment, Buddhahood as you can come. How is the person changed? One of the theses, for example, of Mahadeva was that an arhat can be led astray, can be deceived, okay, by things. He might not know the true nature of reality sometimes, whether he's dreaming or not, for example. So the idea of, an arhat can still kind of have sexy dreams sometimes, even though he's not having sex, he can still be kind of deceived by some demon to dream about sex, Arhats are still subject to ignorance. They don't know everything. They don't necessarily know everything. An arhat is still subject to doubt and may need to ask questions of others, therefore. So, where's the way to the bathroom? Oh, arhat, it's that way. Down the hall, take a left, take a right. It's the brown door. So an arhat can be doubtful and need help and ask questions, which is obviously a consequence of the earlier thesis, which is, an arhat can be ignorant and not know everything. And entry, yeah, okay. How do I describe this? Well, anyways. So basically, an arhat, even though he is enlightened or awakened, can still be subject to temptation, can still make progress, and hasn't overcome all ignorance. Okay? And so Mahadeva's 5 points were a topic of controversy. All right? The elders The elders, which will later become Theravada Buddhism, said that no, they rejected these theses. These were Mahadeva's theses, and they were also accepted by the larger community of the Mahayanist Buddhists. But the Theravadas said no, when someone becomes an arhat, they are no longer human in these ways. So the opposite of what Mahadeva, an arhat for Theravada Buddhism he is not ignorant. He knows all. He doesn't have to ask questions. If he does ask you a question, he's only appearing to ask you a question. He really knows the answer, but he's leading you for some purpose. He cannot be led astray or tempted. He's kind of like a perfect being once he achieves arhathood. But for the Mahayanists, no, they accepted Mahadeva's 5 theses and said, no, there's still certain human, I guess, characteristics that persist or appear to persist in the arhat even after achieving this status. And so they divided, they broke apart over these theses. That's the traditional view. It was an issue of doctrine. But as we know, the scholarly view is no, it was more about rules. Okay, so you have the Buddha, the Dharma, his teaching. Okay, you have the emergence of 2 forms of, well, you have you can insert in here the 18 schools of Buddhism. Most of them died out, obviously, and we're left with 2 that kind of emerge for whatever reason, doctrine or rules, or maybe a little bit of both, who knows? The great community and the group of the fathers. The group of the fathers becomes what is now called Theravada, the way of the elders. I keep saying fathers, excuse me. The way of the elders, and the great community becomes the great vehicle, Mahayana. And Mahayana is considered the great vehicle because it is like a vehicle. They see it as kind of like the image is used of like a cart, that's pulled by a horse or something. It's a big cart, and it's almost like we would say in our language, a big tent. It includes a lot of things, right? When you talk about politics or something, you say, well, we want a big tent for our political party, which means you want to include a whole bunch of different views, right? You don't just want to have necessarily one view. Yeah? Let's go. And that's kind of like what Mahayana is. It's like the great tent of Buddhism. So local religions kind of get melded into the Buddhist idea, the Buddhist doctrine. Local religions like Burn religion, which is from Tibet, meditation, Chan from China, meditation, that didn't derive necessarily from Buddhism. The great focus on meditation was really developed in China and was brought into Buddhism. And other native religions as well are kind of blended into the Buddhist belief system. Okay, so Tibetan Buddhism has elements of the ancient or the previous Tibetan religion. Zen Buddhism in Japan focuses a lot on meditation. That comes from Chan. Meditation practices in China, and they make it Buddhist, et cetera, and so forth. Okay. So it's a great vehicle because it's like a cart. You can throw all sorts of stuff into the back of the cart, and Buddhism is like the cart, the structure, and all these other religious beliefs and cultural practices. It doesn't matter what they are, or even if they're totally contradictory. It doesn't matter. The cart carries them along and leads everyone to nirvana. Theravada doesn't really do that, they think. So, what is Theravada? The teaching of the elders. Okay? The teaching of the elders. Vada means speech or doctrine. Vada, the word vada means speech. And Thera means an older person, an elder. Okay? The Sthaviras or the Theravadas are traditionally concerned with doctrinal purity and the preservation of the Buddhist teachings without innovation or alteration. So they're seen more as the more conservative group. Theravada Buddhism appeared around the 200s BC as part of that larger group of the 18 schools of Buddhism, Buddhist thought. But it's the only one of the traditional schools to have survived. There were other versions that were similar to Theravada, but this is the only version from those schools that survived. And so Theravada, if you're looking for what you could say is the original Buddhism, or the Buddhism that is, God bless you, that is closest to, I guess, the authentic Buddha, or the oldest surviving lineage of ancient Buddhism, then Theravada is what you want. And as I showed you on the map, it predominates mainly in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. Theravada Buddhism emphasizes the Pali Canon, so the Tipitaka. That's their main source. That's where they look. In Mahayana Buddhism, yes, the Tipitaka is part of it, but they add in Mahayana, they add all sorts of other writings onto it. So Theravada is more focused on the Pali Canon and opposed to the additions that the Mahayanas make to the scriptures. Theravada is very focused on monasticism in the quest for personal liberation. Yes, it's a sangha. It's supposed to be a community. And it is, because they're living in community as monks. But really, the essence of Buddhism is a personal liberation. No one can do it for you. Someone can teach you how to do it, lead you into how to do it, and into doing it. But ultimately, it's a it's a DIY thing. It's do it yourself. You have to do it. No one is going to save you. The Buddha's not going to save you. He's not going to help you. He's gone. He's wafted away. You have to do it yourself. So while you might see on the outside that there's a community, it's really very individual, and at least in Theravada, traditional Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. So the Theravadins try to keep to the Buddha's original teachings as found in the earliest writings. And so there's that emphasis on the individual's effort towards achieving nirvana. Only monks can do this. You have to be totally committed to it, which is the traditional view. I mean, Muhammad. Gautama Buddha founded really a religious order more than a religion. Okay? It's more of a religious order. A lot of Buddhists don't go that route because they can't. That's when we get to Mahayana Buddha. That's Mahayana Buddhism. That's one of the benefits of Mahayana Buddhism, because there was that recognition that most people simply cannot live a monk's or a nun's life for the rest of their lives. They have work to do. They have families and stuff like that. But for Theravada, no, it preserves that ideal of being in a monastery all the time, spending all your time on meditation and doing all the practices you need to do to achieve nirvana. So you have to be a monk, which means a male. Nuns cannot achieve it in this cycle. You'll have to be reborn as a male and become a Buddhist monk. Sorry, ladies. But you're on your way if you're a female. You're just not going to reach it in this lifetime if you become a Buddhist nun. So in Theravada countries, or countries where Theravada Buddhism predominates, like Thailand and stuff like that, it's very common for people to spend a certain amount of time in a monastery living as a monk. Spend at least part of their life, maybe their childhood or something. And then they go off to a normal life, and stuff like that. If you're a guy, they get married and have kids and have a job, or a wife, a woman, can also have a job as well, and children and things if they want. But they do try to preserve that connection to the monastery, spending maybe sometime during the year, every year, spending a month or so in the monastery, as well as just spending some time of their lives in a monastery. Because, I got you. Okay, I'll continue on Thursday. God bless you all. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Taken up.
Fine, thank you. Thank you.
Good day, miss.
Thank you.
Oh, good day. Good day, miss. Good day, sir. Good day, miss. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Have a good day, sir. Thank you.